You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 170. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sarah Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
If we're not aware of who we are and what God's created us to be, then we're really at a loss to live into what God is wanting us to do.
This week, we're having a conversation with Barry Burns. Barry is the father of two sets of twins, a husband, a pastor who is currently serving as a district superintendent and dean of the cabinet. It's a conversation filled with grace, reflection, and wisdom as we explore the intersection of self-awareness and leadership. With a close-up and wide-angle view on the impact of social media and how different seasons of ministry bring about different challenges in leadership, we explore self-care and having grace for ourselves, as well as how each of these elements play into self-awareness. As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/podcast. Links to the things that we've mentioned in this episode and the reflection questions at the end can also be found on that page. And once again, you're looking for episode 170. Without any further wait, here's our conversation with Barry Burns.
Well, Barry, welcome to LeaderCast.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to it.
Would you tell those who are listening today who you are and what do you get paid to do?
Sure. Well, I'm many things, depending on which hat I'm wearing at the time. I'm a husband of 32 years. I'm a father of 4 adult kids, 2 sets of twins. The oldest are 20, how old are they now? 26, soon to be 27. And our youngest are 24, 25, soon to be 26. So we're very proud of that. What I get paid to do, I'm in my 36th year already of being a pastor here in West Ohio. I've served all of those years. I've been all over the conference in many different places. I'm in my 7th year as being superintendent of the Northwest Plains District. And I'm in my 3rd year. I don't get any extra pay for this, but I'm in my 3rd year of being dean of cabinet. So those different things, depending on what day you ask me, is what I am and what I get paid to do.
Part of what we focus on at LeaderCast is to provide insight and resources for courageous leaders. So what does it being a courageous leader mean to you?
Well, I have come to realize many more people see themselves as courageous leaders than actually act like courageous leaders. What I have seen, and I've read numerous articles and listened to podcasts and books and all of that. What I've come to think of a courageous leader as is a leader who is missionally focused, who will make decisions based on the mission and not on the popularity or their fans that way. And then that decision making is a whole wealth of things. They confront reality head on. They surround themselves with people who will give them honest feedback, and they look for that honest feedback. They're not looking for people just to blindly agree with them. They're willing to say what's needed to be said, and they do it lovingly, and many times do it lovingly and compassionately, but they're not afraid to say what they need to say. They're good at communicating openly, and in times of stress and anxiety, they do it often and effectively communicate. Other things like they're change agents. They lead change effectively, which is a difficult thing to do in the midst of all that we're seeing around us that way. They make decisions quickly, but not rushed. All of those different things is how I see the courageous leader. But the biggest thing that I see as a courageous leader is one who is comfortable with who God has made them to be, and they function well in their own skin. And they know that they are called by God to lead whatever the group of people is. And they take that very serious. And it's about the mission and not about anything else that way.
So you've started down the the direction we want to talk about today in regard to self-awareness. One of the questions that we ask is, what do courageous leaders need to know, do, and understand? And as we narrow that down, self-awareness is one of those things courageous leaders need to do, know, and understand. So we want to continue the conversation going in that direction. So as broadly as I can do it, but as clearly as you can say it, when we talk about self-awareness, what do you hear, or what does that mean to you?
Well, again, I've been listening to Brene Brown a lot on podcasts and reading some of the writings. My kids actually turned me on to her that way. And I can't remember what the setting was, but it's been within the last year or so. She said that the reason there's so much hate and unhappiness in the world because people lack self-awareness. And I'm finding that there's a lot of people who claim and take pride in being so self-aware, and yet their actions are not speaking or not showing that self-awareness in many ways at all. And I wish I could say that I've been self-aware my whole 58 years, and I've not. There are some days still today that I'm more aware of who I am and what I am than there are other days. If we're not aware of who we are and what God's created us to be, then we're really at a loss to live into what God is wanting us to do. I can think back, probably the one of the biggest crisis moments in my adult life was back early 2000s. I had just been appointed down to Hamilton at Lindenwold Church. It was 2001, 2002, in that time frame. 9/11 just happened. My grandmother just passed away. We had 4 young kids. Our youngest were 5 or 6. Our oldest were, 7, 8, 9 years old in that time frame. When I went there, the church was averaging around 200 people a Sunday, and we had grown it up in the first couple of years up to about 280. And then in 2 years' time, we had 75 members die in a 2-year period, 35 to 40 members each year for 2 years. And that really took the wind out of the sails that way. And what I found myself doing in that is I lost track of who I was as a leader. I crossed some boundaries in self-care. I allowed myself to we were dealing with some conflict around change, and I just was not at my best. And I remember at that point getting to the point of really having a heart-to-heart talk with my wife, Julie, about, is there another way? Is there something else I can do to provide for our family? And to walk away from this ministry. And I look back on that time period, and I think a lot of it is I just lost track of me. In the midst of all that, the accumulated grief of losing all those people, and we were coming in, many Sundays, and seeing the holes in the congregation where those people sat. You know how we all have our seats. And that congregation got used to those 2 years, all of a sudden seeing gaps in the pews and remembering the people who were there. And so there was just so much that went into that. And I had a good counselor that helped me get through that time and taught me a lot about this self-awareness that has shaped who I have grown to be since that time. Not saying I'm anywhere near where I want to be, but certainly better than I was at that point. So, that's where I see the importance of self-awareness, certainly. And I just see so many of our pastors today, and that's who I work with the most. That DS has spent most of our time with pastors. So, if we're dealing with stress, it's kind of self-induced stress in many ways that way. But I see so many pastors who are trying to be something that they're not, or they have this image of who they are that is really not in their gift set or not in their God-given personalities or their self that way.
So something I'm to follow up with what you're saying, something that was not around when you and I started in ministry that many of our colleagues now have to be aware of, and that's social media.
Oh, my.
So
yes.
The self-awareness around social media is a real issue, isn't it?
Yes. And I see, social media, and this is where I'm going to sound like an old fogey or dinosaur, but I'm amazed at how much of my time is spent cleaning up messes from things that pastors or some lay leaders have said carelessly that has really caused harm. And I've joked with people, I've pulled back from Facebook and Megas, but I still go on Monday and Tuesdays because I want to see what our pastors and laity have said, that I know I'm going to get phone calls and emails from other people who have been harmed by that. We get behind the keyboard and we think we're anonymous, and all of a sudden we get courageous, but I think we vilify, we become toxic when there's that anonymity that way. It's hard to have a relationship when there's the computer in front of you that way.
Yeah, I remember when Facebook was just coming on the scene, and early on, I remember someone saying to me, and I wish I could remember who it was, but I remember them saying to me, just always remember that there are people on the other side of that.
Yeah. And what I've had to remind many pastors is once you type it, you hit post, it's out there. Right. Even if you take that post down, somebody has taken a screenshot, somebody has, it's in the cache of computer world,
right,
someplace. And it could come back to harm you at that point.
Yeah.
Part of what I've tried to work with people and myself about is, to me, that one of the first steps of self-awareness is I listen more than I talk. Now, part of that's my own personality. I'm a little bit more introverted than I am extroverted and all of that. And I try to think before I speak. Don't always do it, but I try to. And social media, the computer, when I'm typing either email or Facebook or any of those, I don't always take the time to listen more than I talk. I think everybody needs to hear what I'm saying and my thoughts. And I forget I need to hear what people are saying and hear their hearts and not just their words.
So has any of that been magnified in the past year because of the pandemic? I mean, we've all been working in different ways, and we've been talking about social media and technology, and there hasn't been as much face-to-face with people. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious, for you, has that been intensified or refined?
I think it depends on the person. I mean, I think in some settings, I think for people who are self-aware, I think it's been a refining process. I think for people who lack that self-awareness, it's poured gasoline on fires. In our polarized society, one of the worst things that have happened is we no longer are interested, in my eyes, we're no longer interested in people who disagree with me. I'm vilifying, I'm proving them wrong. I have all these other negative motives, but I forget that I'm in relationship with. And if that's in the same church, we have to realize we're part of the body, whether or not we agree with each. And that's a tough hurdle to get over when we're told by society that we need to express every thought. One of my youngest daughters, we always joke, she was always our reporter. We didn't ever have to wonder what happened at elementary school with any of our kids, because Emily would come home and report everything that Andy and Laura and Elizabeth did. And we just jokingly said, my wife and I would look at each other and say, she's never had a thought she didn't express, and I think that's the way some people approach the digital world, is we think just because we have a thought means that the rest of the world deserves to hear it. And I think for me, I want to be able to hear something before I speak into that.
So you said that you've pulled back from Facebook, but there's still the world of Zoom. There's still the world of email.
Sure.
Technology, whether we love it or hate it, it's with us. And
sure, it is. And it can be an effective tool.
Right. There's text messages. And we've all said things or sent things that we wish that, there was the take back, get back here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, how did you become aware of the filters that you needed to have in place? Because you brought up Brene Brown. There was a post on Facebook after the riots at the U.S. Capitol that I started to respond to, and then Brene Brown popped into my head, and she has a saying, don't talk, text, or type. When you're reacting to something and you're mad, you're frustrated,
Mhm.
The more negative emotions, because likely you're going to say something that you shouldn't say. And I put down my phone and I walked away, and guess what? I forgot about it.
Mhm.
That's become a filter for me. Is this a time that I shouldn't be talking, texting, or typing? and I'm aware of it. So I'm wondering for you, what's that filter? Or what filter might you invite folks to explore that are listening to this? Does that make sense?
Sure. And I think where I've learned in my years, where I've learned is by me crossing over that line and not paying attention to the filter. So I'll say that right off the bat. I've learned it from the mistakes I've made. And I know there have been messages I've hit send on or post on that should not have been. And I've inflicted harm on people that I get frustrated with others about. So I'm the first one to say I've not arrived on this yet. But one of the things that I try to do, and I forget who told or taught me this, is, for example, in emailing, and maybe I forget even where it was. Whenever I get an email from somebody who is complaining or attacking, or really, I can feel my anger rising, I will type a response to them. But I've had to grow in the self-discipline of not hitting send and putting it in my draft box and then waiting for 24 hours and going back and reading. I have, there have been times I've had 10, 15 letters in my draft box that I will never send, but it was kind of purging for me to respond to it that way. But I realize the danger of that is if I'm not in a good place emotionally, I'm not going to have the discipline of refraining from hitting send. Yeah, if I'm not in a good place emotionally myself, and in a time like this when there's so much anxiety and stress, we have a lot of leaders who are not in good places emotionally. They're worn out. I don't blame them. I mean, we're all worn out. We're tired of the changes. We've had all of that. But when I'm not in a good place myself, it's easy to skip that step of putting it into draft box, and I'll hit send, and usually that's when I regret it the most. I've tried to teach myself, and again, I forget where some of these come from. I've tried to recall some of my lessons where email and texting and all that is never a good place to fight an argument. If I'm arguing with somebody by email, I need to stop, make a phone call, set a time to do it face to face, some other way where I can remember that I'm in relationship with them. But that takes, I have found I have to screw up my courage to be able to do that, because it's much easier to do it in my office where I don't have to be face to face with them.
That's a good word.
Very good. I'm listening closely, Dean. Let me try a question that you decide how you want to answer it. But what mistakes have you witnessed or made yourself in regard to self-awareness, and how did you, if you're talking about you, how did you get back up and get going again?
Well, yeah, looking back, whatever that was, 15, 20 years ago, the mistake I made is I continued to give until I had nothing else to give. I remember reading Henry Nouwen and some of the Wounded Healer and some of those kind of readings. And I can remember somebody telling me, and I've quoted this to many of our pastors now, that an unhealthy pastor cannot lead a healthy church. And back then, I got to the point where I was not caring for myself. I wasn't paying attention to family time. I was allowing the conflict and all the funerals, and I didn't allow myself to work through the grief that was needed to do that. And I just stopped practicing those self-care practices that would produce health in me. So what I had to do is I had to take a step back. I had to find a counselor. That fortunately I had a good counselor that helped me talk through it. I surrounded myself with a small group of people that I trusted. A couple of them were clergy, a couple of them were lay people. And I asked them outright, I said, if you see me going down this path, I'm giving you permission to pull me back, to call me on it. This is too important to just continue to go down this path where it could lead to all kinds of unhealth. And so fortunately, I found those people there that could do that. Over the years, I've not stayed in as close touch with them, but I'm very thankful for the time that we were in relationship. As itinerant pastors, we seem to get moved on every 6, 7, 8 years, whatever it is. But fortunately, since that time, I have found groups of people that can hold me accountable to those kind of boundaries. I still struggle with it, as well as I do, Tim, as DSs, and with phone, and everybody knows our cell phone number. It's easy to work when we're at home, when we should be paying attention to family. It's easy to let those boundaries get softened and grayed that way, but it's an ongoing battle. So self-care is one of the big things that I had to relearn in my own life that way.
So one of the things I'm hearing you say, I just want to affirm it. I think I heard you say it, and that is, there is life after mistakes.
Oh, sure. If there wasn't, how depressing would that be?
Well,
would any of us be in ministry if there wasn't?
Yeah, I mean that, and many of the most effective pastors I've known or read or listened to can point to moments in their life where they hit a wall and they've crashed and burned, or hopefully it's been contained where they've not done much damage, but it still is those moments where we all, and I would dare say every one of us will do that because we're human.
And there's a healthiness in reaching out to surround ourselves with people who can help us be who we're supposed to be.
Oh, yeah. I know if there's one thing I've learned is I can't do this by myself. I like being independent, but I realize I'm not completely independent. Not only am I dependent upon the Spirit and upon my relationship with God, God's put me in this place to be in relationship with each other. And I learn from others that way. And part of what I've had to come to grips with is me being a little more introvert. I get energy from being by myself. And I realize, when I was in Circleville, we would have 3 Sunday morning services. And by noon, I was peopled out, and my family just knew Sunday afternoon, just give Dad his time apart. And we worked well that way. I mean, you get into a rhythm, but I have to be aware of what my own needs are at that point.
Good self-awareness.
I hope to be growing in that all the time.
I'm smiling, Barry, because in the local churches that I've served, multiple services on Sunday morning, and that was me too.
And I can remember when our kids were younger, when I was up in Toledo, we would have about a 5-mile drive between the parsonage and the church, and we would all go in one car at that point. That has changed since then because just life happens. But I can still remember my oldest daughter, who is one of the most intelligent people. She passed me up a long time ago in intelligence and smart, but she loved reading the Old Testament, and she had a memory like a steel trap. And whenever I preach on the Old Testament, right away she would start correcting those mistakes that I made in my sermon. And I finally said, Laura, just give me an hour. Don't start critiquing for give me an hour, and I'll be better able to talk with you at that point.
Children are really training parents in humility. I've decided that is one of their primary purposes in life.
Yeah, very much so.
I've been hearing this in you as you've been talking about self-awareness. So I'm just going to ask it outright. What role do grace and generosity play in self-awareness for you?
Well, I think in multiple ways. One is I have to be filled with grace towards myself and realize that I am dependent upon God's grace and generous with giving myself permission to be who I am. And that allows me to be more grace-filled to be with others. It comes in little things about being curious about my own thoughts and minds and giving myself, being being aware of where my blind spots are and trying to identify those areas that way. A long time ago, I gave up trying to be perfect because I know I'm far from perfect. And I know that I accepted with my whole heart that God loved me in spite of my imperfection. What I have trouble doing is being that same way to others, and with myself is when I am tired or when I am not at my best, that perfection gene creeps back in and I start hammering myself for I can think back to all those places where I dropped the ball. And I've had to deal with all that negative self-talk so that I can approach the world more with grace. I'm not a big one to preach about Satan and all of that, but I see Satan as the deceiver. And one of the prime ways that is we are deceived about ourselves and wants to distract us from that mission that God's given to us. So I've had to be on guard against that. And the best way to do that is doing all those other things that I know I need to do to care for myself and to know that I do have those blind spots and I'm trying to be aware of it. And I need to pay attention to where people are indicating I have those blind spots.
So I'm interested in how do you help others understand their blind spots?
It depends on the kind of relationship. There are some people that we are in a relationship that's trusting enough. I can just tell them, and in conversation, whether it's in a coaching or mentoring relationship or whatnot. There are others that are less trusting at that point, and it's just ongoing work. I mean, that helping others see their blind spot can be painful work because none of us want to admit that we have those. And I try to take, like with the pastors I'm supervising, I try to, usually it comes up when there's conflict in their churches at that point. And I try to help them debrief about what happened here. We try to do an autopsy on the conflict and say what caused all this. And hopefully we can get around to those substantive conversations of where they missed something about themselves or the situation or the reality or whatever. But I'd be lying if I said every time it did that. That's where not everybody is as self-aware as I would like to be, and where I'm not as self-aware as I would like to be at that point.
If only there was a magic pill of self-awareness.
Oh my. Yeah, it's the only way that I know to help others see their blind spot is through long-lasting, trusting relationships where we can build enough trust that we can be transparent with each other. And we just don't have enough of those in our life today. And I find too many pastors have surrounded themselves with people that aren't going to be honest at that point, or they don't surround themselves with people who can be what they need to help them find those blind spots.
I'm wondering, when we choose not to either receive feedback or folks intentionally are not going to receive feedback or are not self-aware, there's a part of me that says you're missing the growing in grace. We're all growing. Mm-hmm. We're on a journey. We haven't arrived.
Yeah. And when we think we've arrived is when we're most in trouble.
Right.
And ideally the pastor has their PPRC or SPRC that can give them feedback and all of that. But too many times that's a dysfunctional relationship in too many of our churches where the PPRC thinks they're the boss or they're there to pick apart the pastor. I mean, there's just a lot of dysfunction in the relationships in the church.
Something you said, Barry, made me think about bad habits. We all have them. So when I say that, part of what I'm thinking is how much of our self-awareness gets blinded by our bad habits, that it becomes so ingrained. This is how I'm doing things, that it goes back to the blind spots piece of it's a bad habit.
Sure. And the bad habit can create the blind spot in many ways. Yeah. it gives us places we can hide behind so that we don't reveal all that.
Right. Are you ready for the rapid fire questions?
As ready as I will be, I'm sure.
These are mostly fun. Nothing you
Okay.
have to give a whole lot of thought to. They're really designed to be questions that help the folks that will listen to this episode experience you in a slightly different way. So, Tim, you
Sure.
want to start us out?
Barry, what's your favorite meal to eat out?
A favorite meal to eat out? I would say a good steak someplace, whether it's there's a local steakhouse here that for a special meal, we'll go out there to eat that.
What do people misunderstand about you?
People think I'm very easygoing. They don't know what's going on inside of me. I mask the anxiety very well, which is not a good thing all the time.
What Netflix series, movie, or TV show have you binge watched recently?
During the pandemic, I've gotten hooked on Grey's Anatomy. I'm up to season 13 now, I think it is. I never thought I would be hooked on that. I've also rewatched all the Office episodes until now. They switched over to Peacock, but so those would be the two that I've watched. But they're, I can't remember a couple of the other ones, but those are the two main ones.
What are you reading?
Right now, I'm reading and it sounds strange, but I'm reading a biography on President Polk because I never really read anything about him, and I'm finding there's so many parallels with what he went through to what we have gone through with our own election, which is just fascinating. I try to read a biography every so often. I'll try to read some nonfiction, John Grisham, Andrew Greeley, some of those, whenever I just need to turn my mind off.
What's bringing you joy these days?
Not enough sometimes. I tell you, during the pandemic, my wife and I've spent more time together than we've had. Some of it, she probably was not as happy as I have been on that, but we've been able to spend more time together than we have consistently for many years before that. So I think that's been a very good thing.
Well, Barry, thank you for taking time out of your day to spend some time with us and with our listeners and share your wisdom about self-awareness and your journey of becoming more self-aware. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for your ministry, and I'm grateful for your leadership. So thank you.
Well, it's been my pleasure.
Is there any last minute word that you would like to share with our listeners about self-awareness, about leadership?
I just think the more self-aware we can be, the more effective we'll be at doing whatever job it is we're doing, whether it's pastoring a church or lay ministry, whatever it is. And I do I forget where I even read it. What I said earlier at the beginning is so many people claim they're self-aware, but very few people are. And I think we all need to grow in that self-awareness.
Barry, I appreciate the time you've given us today. That's only one small appreciation among a lot of big ones. It's really an honor to work alongside you, and I'm grateful for that. And to be able to experience God's love and grace through you. That help makes me who I am, and I can't thank you enough for how that happens with you. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And God has worked through you all, and I appreciate the time we've had here together, and am humbled that you asked. So I appreciate that.
Well, truly, thank you.
Well, blessings to both of you.
You as well, Barry.
Thank
you.
Have a good evening.
You're welcome. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So you've taken a wide angle view and you've done some close-ups on self-awareness and leadership. So let's do the same with our reflection questions today. I actually have 4 for you today. I guess we're going into the overachiever category this week. Just kidding. Okay, first question. Are you ready? Who has God created you to be? And think about that question in terms of, would your answer change if you knew whatever you said wouldn't be judged by anyone? Question number 2, What do you need in this season of life and leadership? Question 3. What distractions or blind spots are holding you back from being who God created you to be? And finally, number 4, what is your relationship with social media? Does it need to be adjusted? Just wondering. Once again, you can find show notes for this episode, including the questions that I just walked through, as well as links to the things that we talked about at transformingmission.org/podcast. You're looking for episode 170. To go directly to this episode, just go to transformingmission.org/170. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.